What are your top priority items for a second term?
Well, one of the things that will be really great, you know, the word experience is still good. I always say talent is more important than experience. I've always said that. But the word experience is a very important word. It's in a very important meaning. I never did this before. I never slept over in Washington. I didn't know very many people in Washington. It wasn't my thing. I was from Manhattan, from New York. Now I know everybody. And I have great people in the administration.
President Trump on Thursday night with Sean Hannity. Let's talk about this now with our roundtable, joined by Christie, former governor of New Jersey, CEO of Democracy for America, Yvette Simpson, Rahm Emanuel, former White House Chief of Staff and Mayor of Chicago, and Republican strategist Sarah Fagan. And Chris, let me begin with you. You saw the president get that question on his second-term priorities, didn't specify anything when he was talking to Sean Hannity right there. You're in regular contact with the White House. Does the president believe he's losing right now, and what does he need to do about it?
Well, listen, he is losing. And if he doesn't change course, both in terms of the substance of what he's discussing and the way that he approaches the American people, then he will lose. There's no question that while these national polls are less significant in terms of the raw numbers, the trend is obvious. The trend is moving towards Joe Biden when Joe Biden hasn't said a word. Joe Biden's hiding in the basement and not saying anything. No discredit to the vice president. If you're winning without doing anything, why do anything? The president has to change course here, both in terms of the substance and answering that question much better than he did with Sean Hannity in terms of what he wants to do in a second term. And secondly, he needs to approach the American people in a different way than he's been approaching them recently. So I said this last week, George, there's no doubt the president's an underdog. He's more of an underdog today than he was a week ago. Now, there's 128 days left, as was said by Nate Silver, and there is still a lot of time to go here. President Dukakis, as I said last week, was up over Vice President Bush back in 1988 at this time. So there's still a lot of time to go, but there has to be some fundamental changes that need to be made by the president and his team. If they don't do it, they're in big trouble.
Some real candor there from Christie, Rahm Emanuel. Let me ask you the question I asked Nancy Pelosi. What is the greatest threat to Joe Biden's campaign right now?
Well, if you look at the piece that I would focus on right now, both to accentuate, is Joe Biden's got seniors, the first Democrat to win in his winning 65 and older voters since Al Gore. And if everybody remembers, even though they made fun of this interview, back in Davos, President Trump acknowledged that he was going to look in a second term at Social Security and Medicare. And given the opportunity Democrats have right now with seniors, which is basically a 20-year, one-time historic moment, I would start drilling down on that senior vote. I come from the great Jewish tradition of paranoia, and I think the weakest link when you look at everybody that's gravitating towards towards Joe Biden, seniors are the most vulnerable group because of what they think about the president, what they think about him on economic terms, et cetera. And I would take right now, if I was Joe Biden, and go after that senior vote to solidify it. You have a window of opportunity. They're opening to listening. And I would remind them that in a second term in Davos, the president himself said he's going to cut Social Security and Medicare, and his own budget 2 years ago was the largest cut in Medicare. I've said it on this show, and that's exactly where I would go right now if I was Joe Biden.
So there's advice for Joe Biden from Rahm Emanuel. Sarah Fagan, how about some advice to President Trump and Republicans from you? Rahm Emanuel talked about the seniors right there. Where he's really falling short right now, though, and looks to be a huge threat, suburban white women who have just abandoned the president.
Well, I agree with what Governor Christie said, but I would add a third thing, which I think complements for Republicans what we need to do to keep seniors and suburban women, as you pointed out, which is to not only draw, to lead on coronavirus and race relations and all the things the president needs to step forward on, but also to remind them what they're getting with Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not the leader of the Democratic Party right now. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are. He put Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez in charge of his climate policy. These are not things seniors want to see in America. They may be unhappy with Donald Trump at the moment, but they don't want a Green New Deal. They don't want Medicare for all. They don't want free college tuition for everybody. They understand, because of their wisdom and their experience, that the country can't afford this. Democrats have put no plausible plan to pay for any of these things. And so I think the president needs to do three things. He needs to reassure the country on coronavirus. he needs to put forward a positive agenda for the country, and he needs to remind voters, suburban women and seniors, and other important voting blocks to his constituency, just what electing Joe Biden means for the country.
Yvette, you and Democracy for America fought pretty hard for progressives like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing to remember is that most Americans actually support these policies. And so seniors, they care about their grandchildren. They want to leave the planet better. They want to make sure that their kids are good. They have Medicare. They understand what it's like to have a secure healthcare system. They want that for everyone. But I think the big picture, George, is this enthusiasm gap that we still have against the president, right? He has twice as much energy as Joe Biden does when you think about people who are excited about voting for him. And so we need to mobilize and excite our base. That translates into voter mobilization and the type of resilience we're going to need to overcome the voter suppression and maybe foreign interference that we're going to see in this election. And so I would say he does need to come out of the basement. We need to see him energized. We need to see him have a concrete plan, even if it's digital, for how we're going to get voters to show up. And I think if we do that, I think we win. It's too early. June is too early to call this race. And you know that President Trump is like Teflon. Everything that comes on him, it bounces right off, and it doesn't seem to stick at all. So we need to be not expecting this implosion by Donald Trump, because I don't think we're going to see it. We need to energize our base, and we need to make sure they show up.
Chris, Yvette says she doesn't expect to see an implosion by Trump, but I was struck by something I saw in Politico this morning from Sam Nunberg, who's a longtime political advisor to President Trump. He says that President Trump is facing a possibly historic defeat, and he goes on to, quote, say, if Trump numbers against Biden erode to 35 percentage points over the next 2 weeks, he's going to be facing realistically a 400-plus electoral vote loss, and the president will need to strongly reconsider whether he wants to continue to run as the Republican presidential nominee. You expect something like that from James Carville, but Sam Nunberg?
George, I don't spend any of my time, because it would be a complete waste of time, listening to Sam Nunberg. He has no idea what he's talking about, and I don't even know why reporters call and talk to him except to get inflammatory, ridiculous quotes like that. The best news I've heard this morning is what Yvette just said. Listen, for Republicans, we need to get Joe Biden out there and campaigning. When he does, he will make mistakes, he will misspeak, and Yvette just put it out there, but in a very nice way. The liberal wing, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is very, very suspicious of Joe Biden. They didn't support him during the primary season. They didn't want him as the nominee. And that's why Joe Biden's just trying to sit on his lead right now. Now, if I were him, I wouldn't do anything different, but it's the Republicans' job to put forward, as Sarah said, a forward-looking agenda for the next 4 years so that Biden will be forced to come out and tell people what his agenda is. When he does, it will divide the Democratic Party. Rahm will want certain things to be said. Yvette will want very different things to be said. And if they can't come together, that's going to be a big problem for Joe Biden.
Rahm, does the vice president have to worry about this enthusiasm gap?
Look, I mean, you have to worry about a lot of things. I think right now he's, I would just say it this way. 3 weeks ago, everybody was saying, oh, Joe Biden's got to do this, Joe Biden's got to do that. No, this is a race of Trump versus Trump, and Trump is losing that race. And Biden has a good strategy to force Trump into the center and not make it a binary choice until it has to be. He will lay out an agenda, a prospective agenda that will actually take consideration both restoring the public health of the country, restoring the health of the economy, and restoring the well-being and health of the civil society that are all under threat. The fact is the American people right now have made a judgment both on the political and moral leadership of this president, and he is failing on all grades. And my guarantee is, which is on this Russian story, it will continue to show that the President of the United States is failing his most important job as commander-in-chief. If he got briefed on the fact that the Russians are targeting American soldiers, and then this week we would have had the G7 meeting where he invited Putin, it will be a dereliction of duty that will require congressional hearings into what exactly happened. I know how those briefings on intel go. And the fact is, Americans have unnecessarily lost their lives here at home because we weren't prepared for this virus and still are not prepared for reopening. And now we have a report that, in fact, the President of the United States was given a briefing of what the Russians were trying to do to our troops. And the way we had consequences is took no action but invited them to a meeting of the G7 that would happen this week in Washington. That is a major crisis of leadership, and the whole world is watching.
Sarah Fagan, we saw the president deny that he was briefed. Also, the director of national intelligence denied that he was briefed, did not deny the intelligence. But in some ways, the president is damned and the White House is damned if they do, damned if they don't here. It's also a problem for the president if the intelligence community had this intelligence and he wasn't briefed.
Yeah, it is a real problem if that's, in fact, the truth. But we don't know what the truth is. So I think the president should call for figuring that out. If the intelligence is true, and if Russia is doing this or has done this, the United States needs a very strong response. Sanctions, other measures, disinvite Putin from the G7. Absolutely. That is a disgrace by Russia, and the United States should have a very strong response. But I will point out that there's such a desire among the left to tie Donald Trump to Russia. It's almost, even for credible conservatives, it's almost hard to believe any of these reports because it seems to be almost a North Star for the party. And so we don't know what's true, and we don't know that this is true.
Sure.
And if Yvette, well, go ahead, and then I want to bring in Yvette. Go ahead.
Remember, Afghanistan operation is a NATO-led operation. That means all our allies know of this intelligence. So they also watched what the president did. That is, you remember, Merkel pulled out of this meeting that was supposed to happen this week. It's not going to happen based on the virus. But all our allies, Germany, Great Britain, others who have troops in Afghanistan, they know about this intelligence. And they've watched the president's actions as it relates to Russia. That's why there are consequences both here at home as a commander-in-chief, and there's consequences to America standing around the world. If it is true, it is a dereliction of duty that goes to the highest level of the responsibility of a president of the United States.
Yvette, we heard Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi double down on this suggestion that the Russians have something on President Trump.
You look, the Trump-Putin love affair is well documented, so I just want to disagree with Sarah. This is not some hoax that, the left has come up with. We know that he was more than willing to allow Putin to interfere with our democracy. Now it looks like he's also willing to allow him to infiltrate and damage our military.
There's no evidence
so I
to
think the
suggest
Bolton
that
interview, which I know was done.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's no
The Bolton
evidence
interview that was actually done from an insider. I'm sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to say, look, again, this is the North Star of the Democratic Party, is to tie Donald Trump to Russia. When there's been several investigations, none of which have been able to tie any criminal conspiracy. Yes, the Russians were absolutely trying to interfere with our election in 2016. And Donald Trump signed sanctions into law because of that. So we should also point that out. So this obsession with tying Trump to Russia really is ridiculous. And so, look, there's reasons to criticize Donald Trump. I just don't think this is one of them.
Chris, how should he be handling this news story coming out of the New York Times?
Well, what should matter is the truth of what happened. The president's saying he was not briefed about it. If he wasn't, he better find out why he wasn't briefed about it if the report is true. And let's remember something. The New York Times breathlessly, George, reported about Russian collusion. In fact, I think he even got a Pulitzer over it. And as it turns out, Bob Mueller then says there was no Russian collusion between the two.
Well, he said there was no criminal conspiracy. He said there were more than 100 contacts. He said it didn't rise to the level of a criminal conspiracy.
George, 100 contacts. Yeah, but George, listen, again, that's the Democratic talking point, okay? But in the end,
no, that's a fact. I mean, that's what he had in the report. It's not a talking point. That's a fact.
It's
a fact that he documented more than 100 contacts.
He also concluded that none of those things rose to the level of any kind of collusion or conspiracy between the campaign. And I'll bet you this. I'll bet you there were lots of contacts between the Clinton campaign and Russians during that campaign as well. But we didn't have a 2-year investigation into the Clinton campaign. So the fact is there has been no proof of that kind of relationship. So now what the president needs to do is not rise to the bait that Rahm and Yvette and others are putting up there and just say to his intelligence community, is this intelligence correct? If it is, why wasn't I told about it? And then if it is correct, to take very aggressive steps against Putin and the Russians for doing anything like that. Aggressive sanctions.
Rahm?
Yeah. First of all, let me say this. When we were in the White House, President Obama ordered every other Friday a deep dive into issue. The fact is, this was already been, the senior members of the foreign policy team met on this. This should have been led to a deep dive on any issue, one particular issue. They know that the president may not read the briefing. Whether he was briefed on it or in the briefing are two separate issues. I think I'll speak for Sarah and Chris. This is of such a level, given the targeting and killing of American men and women in uniform overseas carrying out our mission, that there should be not just White House meetings, but congressional briefings, and I bet you Sarah and Chris would say it's worthy of that level. And I don't think when it comes to killing our men and women, it's just about sanctions. It is also the fact that the whole world watched it. While he knew this, and they knew that we knew this, he was invited to the G7 that would happen this week in the United States. It says a statement about this president and his priorities. Remember, Ronald Reagan said, weakness invites chaos. And that is what's happened here. China's taking advantage of us, and also Russia's taking advantage.
I'm not the
Go ahead, Chris.
Intelligence Committee. This is not a left-wing conspiracy, Chris. This is not a left-wing conspiracy. It's the intelligence community.
Hold on, one at a time.
I'm not surprised that you want to, I'm not surprised that you want to believe what's written in the New York Times, lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, I'm not surprised that you want to do that. What I'd like to do is to see people in the administration look into this and decide. You're saying categorically the president knew. Well, the president is saying he didn't know. So let's find out what the real truth is. I know, yes, you did. You said the president knew and other people knew he knew. That's what you said. You don't know that to be a fact, and you're putting it out there. It's fine for you to put it out there along with the New York Times, but I think we've seen from the Mueller investigation and the New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting how valid they really are in many stories.
And I think, Ron, we agree. We agree with you. If this is true, absolutely. Good. Very, very tough sanctions. Don't include Russia in the G7. We agree with that. But we don't know if it's true.
Yep.
Sir, but
what is the punishment for President Trump if he knew this, though?
No, but George said it right.
You know, what is the punishment for him?
There's going to be consequences. And if he didn't know about it and didn't read his briefing, there are consequences. Damn if you did and damn if you don't. There should be hearings on it, and also understand the consequences of what this means. And the president's losing right now because they're seeing what's happening overseas. Our men and women are being targeted, and we're losing people here at home, seaside, about stateside, what's happening also, because we are not prepared for this virus. He is failing the leadership test of being president of the United States.
Before we go, I want to get to one last subject, and Yvette, let me bring you in on this. Pretty remarkable. The state of Mississippi is going to be taking the Confederate symbol off of their flag. We heard Governor Hutchinson earlier suggesting that maybe more monuments should come down in the state of Arkansas as well. We really are seeing a sea change here.
We are. I mean, it's remarkable. You're seeing corporations respond by changing the names and the figureheads on their packaging. You're seeing states take down monuments. You're seeing flags change. And I think that's absolutely necessary in this time. You know, we've been through this before, but this feels different. And the big nature of this moment and the reaction that it requires shows that we all need to take a beat and say, how can we make sure that this moment doesn't pass us without making fundamental change in the way that we relate one to another, that corporations relate to the people that they serve, and that the police relate to the people that they are supposed to protect and serve. And so this is a big deal. I actually saw that Faith Hill, who is a country singer, was leading the fight to change the flag in Mississippi. When you see, you know, celebrities who have brands reaching out, the thing that happened with NASCAR, you know, this is a big moment, and I don't want us to miss it. But I also don't want us to be just about performance. We need to see real fundamental change in our country in the way that people relate race to race, and the way particularly that police interact with the public, particularly Black Americans.
Christie, Princeton University in your state, the name Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson, coming off their public policy school. Remarkable moment there as well.
It is, George, and my son, our oldest son, is an alum of Princeton University, graduated there in 2016, and I asked him this morning what he thought about it. And he said he's spoken to a number of his friends who are minority alums of Princeton who are overjoyed this morning. And you know what? He said to me, and he's right, that if, in fact, that's the way they feel about it, he's happy for them and he's happy for the university that he calls his alma mater. I think it's the right move. And I'll tell you this, on the statues, the Confederate statues, these men were traitors. They were traitors that tried to divide this country in order to keep slavery in place. And so I never understood Confederate statues. I'm glad Confederate statues are going down. And I'm glad that the Republican governor of Mississippi is helping to lead the way, that Tate Reeves is helping to lead the way to change their flag. It's long overdue, George, and I think that this is one of the uplifting moments that's coming out of such tragedy as George Floyd's killing. This is the right thing for America to be doing, and Princeton did the right thing this week.
I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. Thank you all for joining us.